IPS family, my dear colleagues and friends. It was just about, I think, 45 days ago, we had a AGM, the annual general body meeting of the IPS Association. It was a kind of midnight AGM. And it was there that we decided collectively that we're going to meet more and more often. Not only to enhance our professional capabilities, but to have a kind of to foster and promote camaraderie among the cadre officers. And today we all have gathered here, though the number is very less, I should say, because I think because of yesterday's incident, most of the city officers are engaged in the investigation. The president of the association himself was busy with the investigation, so we couldn't have many of the senior officers here today. But still, this is one of our first endeavors in that regard of what we decided in the last AGM. And before I could start the proceedings of this evening, I would like to thank Shri Reddy, DGP ISD, along with the President IPS Association, Shri Dayanand, who kept pushing us towards organizing this first event as early as possible, and also introducing to us a very distinguished speaker who is among us today. It is my proud privilege and honor today to be introducing a very distinguished business leader, a social entrepreneur, and an author who is among us today. Our guest today has had an illustrious career in the business world and has held various positions. To name a few, he has been the chairman of the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet. He has been the founder of Global Alliance for Mass Entrepreneurship and currently serves on the board of the Rockefeller Foundation and Hitachi Limited. He has also served as the chairman of the Microsoft India, Bank of Baroda, Cummins India, and co-chairman of Infosys. He was also UNICEF's special representative for young people and innovation, a BTech from IIT Bombay, MS from Purdue University, and MBA from Harvard Business School, where he was a Baker Scholar. He has also authored quite a few books, bestsellers, to list a few. One of them was placed there for your perusal there. What the heck do I do with my life? How to flourish in our turbulent times. Another one, conquering the chaos, win in India, win everywhere. He has been voted as one of India's best management thinkers by Thinkers 50 and has also been Microsoft's Alumni Hero of 2020. Without further ado, I invite you all to join me in welcoming this visionary catalyst for change who is here to share among us his valuable insights this evening. I present before you Shri Ravi Venkatesan.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And without wasting another minute, I would hand over the session to him. Before that, I would request Srinath Joshi to kindly hand over a small sampling welcoming the guest.
All right, so first of all, good evening. Thank you for inviting me, and it's a delight to be with all of you. And I'm grateful to Shri Reddy and Dr. Rao for inviting me. I'm going to talk for about 25-30 minutes, and then hopefully that my comments will get you thinking and in the mood, and we can then get into a discussion. In my experience, the discussion is always the best part of these evenings. So before I start, I wanted to start with a little appreciation, because look, I'm not a policeman, I don't know much about policing, just a citizen. But as I was thinking about it yesterday, the work you do is extraordinarily complex, challenging, and generally underappreciated. But when I think about in a country that is as large and complex as ours, the law and order challenges, police forces always under-resourced, stretched thin. There's always political and bureaucratic interference, And most of all, the challenge is you're like electricity. The only time we notice it is when the power fails. We don't notice it and appreciate it when the power is there. And I think policing is a lot like that. It is not just when there is a situation, but when a situation doesn't go right, that we notice, take notice. The rest of the time we just take it as granted. So I wanted to start off with a little bit of appreciation for the work you do. And so please give yourselves a round of applause, and also all the people who couldn't be here today because they're out there trying to keep the city safe. Much appreciated. So the title of the talk is Meeting the Leadership Challenges of the 21st Century. I'm going to talk briefly about that and certainly touch on it. But I want to actually have a much broader conversation about the way in which the world is changing, what the future holds, what it has in store for each of us, and how we might think about this and prepare ourselves for that. I'm speaking to you not in terms of senior officers of the police force, but as individuals, because I think that's what matters a lot. So most of us don't think much about the future because you're so busy with the present. So it's hard to actually find quiet time to think about what is the world going to look like 10 years from now, 50 years from now. It's a luxury. And even when we do think about it, we tend to assume the future is going to look sort of like today with some changes. And the reason for that is the human mind, the brain, is engineered only to think in linear terms. We are not able to think in exponential terms. But the challenge is the 21st century is witnessing exponential change. The world will change more in these 75 years than in all of human history, which is 10,000 years. And this is going to, it's incomprehensible for most people, including highly educated people like all of us here. And it is also going to be a very big adaptive challenge for us individually, for us as institutions, like the police organizations or businesses, and it is going to be a huge challenge for countries and societies. So I'll start there. And to help you imagine what the future is like, think about a cyclone. Okay? Cyclone in the Bay of Bengal. But now imagine there are 4 cyclones, and these are coming together. They're converging. So one cyclone is bad enough. If 4 or 5 of them actually end up converging in one place, you can imagine the kind of explosive energy that is released. And that's sort of where we are heading as human civilization today. So what are these big, it's called a perfect storm. Perfect storm is the convergence of multiple storms. So think about what these storms are. So one of them is certainly technology, because technology is reshaping everything in the world today. And in particular, there are 2 technologies which I think everybody should be concerned about. One now is, as you know, AI. And by now everybody's aware of generative AI. We're all started using ChatGPT or Google Gemini, Bard or whatever to some extent. But even the creators of AI, and I know many of them like who are in Microsoft or OpenAI, who are on the front lines of creating, cannot begin to imagine the ways in which AI is going to play out. Because the rate at which the innovation is happening, in the next 20 or 30 years, we're likely to achieve a point called singularity. Singularity is when artificial intelligence genuinely reaches the same levels as human intelligence. And after that, the further development will be out of human hands. Okay, it'll take its own course. The machines are not going to be listening to our instructions. And you can see that this is going to profoundly shape everything. Certainly it's going to reshape jobs and work. It's going to reshape how information is generated and disseminated. We're definitely going to move into a post-truth society, and it's going to have profound implications for democracy as we know it. The other huge technology, which is also quite important, is something called synthetic biology. And in synthetic biology, it is the ability to basically edit genes in the genome and reshape life itself. So basically, you're playing God. And both these technologies have profound, profound opportunity for good, but equally, in the wrong hands with the wrong intent, profound opportunities to do bad. And right now, unfortunately, the world doesn't know how to either manage or regulate this so that it's used for good. We did that with nuclear energy. Mostly we've been able to contain the bad because it's highly regulated. But in these two technologies, the genie is out of the bottle. So that's one storm. I would say a second storm is what I call the revenge of the planet. And of course it's about climate change, but it is about much, much more. What people generally don't realize is climate is only one of 9 planetary systems which work together to keep us safe. Another of these planetary systems is the freshwater system. Another one is the ozone layer. Another one is biodiversity. So like this, there are 9 planetary systems that work together to protect life on Earth, and most of all human life. And the really alarming thing is we have breached red levels on 7 out of the 9 planetary systems. And so we are now staring at the edge. And once it goes over the edge, we're in completely unknown territory. We don't know how these systems will interact. So that's going to be a very, very major challenge that's going to play out over the next 20, 30, 50 years. And when you talk about climate change itself, again, we all sort of assume it's going to happen, but it's going to play out somewhere else. We read about extreme weather events, and barring one flood in Bangalore, it's happening elsewhere. Or you'll read about the huge fires which are raging, it's somewhere else. The reality is there is now almost a 0 probability that we will be able to keep the temperature to within 1.5 degrees. Okay, most likely it's going to be 2.5, 2.7. And that is going to be utterly catastrophic. Okay, so think really extreme weather events. Think about the ocean currents, the big ones that are regulating the world's climate systems, either stalling, like the Gulf Stream, or else changing direction. You can definitely see sea levels rising very, very fast. What's going to happen to the monsoon and rain-fed agriculture, God alone knows. So all we can assume is that there will be huge human migrations. And guess what? Means law and order situations on a scale that we cannot imagine. So this is the second storm. I would say a third storm is extreme inequality. When you look at the world's development, there is not only great inequality between nations, there's great inequality within nations. So the latest, we're all celebrating India's newest GDP numbers for the last quarter. They look good, and we should be grateful, because in most of the world's countries, including Germany and UK, things are not looking very bright. However, India is actually 3 different stories. For the top 100 million, which includes all of us, life is good and getting better. For the next 300, 400 million, which we call the middle class, they're working hard to stay in the same place. By the way, middle class in India is a misnomer. The definition is monthly income of 25,000 plus. So a household income of 40,000, 50,000 is middle class, which includes, therefore, the Swiggy driver, your driver, our cook, they're all in the middle class. They work hard to stay in place and educate their children, hoping to come up. And then you have 700-800 million people who are living on 300 rupees or less per day. And unfortunately over there, the escalator to the middle class has slowed down or even stopped. So if you read the unemployment figures, these days, of course, it's hard to know what number to believe. But youth unemployment for young people below 30, even the government numbers say that's about 40%. Okay, so mostly this group, 800 million people, are living on more and more subsidies from different state governments, central governments, but there's a limit to these subsidies. And people don't just want to eat rations, they actually want to progress. This is a great human need to want to advance, and the next generation should be better off than your generation. This mobility, if it's stalled, will create great discontent and again law and order issues, which we are beginning to see, and you are all actually on the front lines of. So I think inequality is a big issue. And the last one, which I would say, is society is becoming a post-truth society. You may have heard the words, but a post-truth society is where even the educated elite no longer care about facts and evidence. We buy into stories and narratives. Whatever feels good is what we buy into. And this can be very dangerous. We see this playing out in the US very clearly, right? So we've got 40% of the voters who have bought into a story of making America great again. And it doesn't matter that their leader, who's Donald Trump, has 97 convictions against him and tried to incite a mob to overturn the last election. They don't care. These are all irrelevant. The story is what they believe in. And you see this playing out in many other countries, and very much true, playing out in India as well. So as a result, social cohesion goes down. And why this is important is, just as we need to come together to tackle these big problems, we are divided. Okay? And this is happening in every country in the world and between countries. So overall, I know you're going to say, what a pessimistic evening. And I'm not a pessimist, I'm actually an optimist, but you won't believe it. But this is the reality. And what I wanted to do today, like I do in my book, is at least get you thinking about these issues and draw your own conclusions. But if you look at the evidence, it points strongly in these directions. So what I say is, look, let's stop sleepwalking our way to the future, because most of us are sleepwalking. Every day you get up, you go through your routine, you hope things will be fine. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But hope is not a good strategy. Okay? I think it's much better to be aware, to be prepared, and that's what I wish more and more people to do. So the advice I give in my book is, look, start being intentional, make decisions with awareness. What are these decisions? Simple things. Where do you live? I think that makes a profound difference. If you choose to live in a place rather than just where you were born, it is going to have great consequences for the opportunities that present themselves, your quality of life, your happiness. So for instance, I choose to live in Bangalore. I could live in many other places, not just in India, anywhere in the world. But this is the product of a choice. And I think if I chose to live in Delhi, life would be very different, or somewhere else. So this should not be an accident, but an intentional choice. Who do you spend time with? So one of the things I quote in my book is, the 5 people you spend the most time with profoundly determines everything. Your beliefs, what you believe in, the way you think, what you define as success depends on the 5 people who you're closest to. So therefore you should choose who are these people, because so much of our life is actually quietly determined by these people. Okay? Another one is, who do you look up to and respect and follow and admire? Again, we are living in a very dangerous time where there's so many false prophets. Okay, post-truth society. So you should think about who you really look up to and follow, and make sure that that's true. Or like the Pied Piper, you can go in a different direction. If most of the information you're getting is from WhatsApp forwards and Instagram, I think you have a real problem. So I say, be intentional about where you get your information and use some critical judgment in what you believe, and so on and so forth. So intentionality is a very central idea. In the time I have left, I'm going to talk about just 3 ideas, and then we'll open it up for discussion. I see a nice mix over here of older people, probably closer to my age, which is 60, and then younger people. But it doesn't matter whether you're old or young. One of the things that's changed profoundly is the nature of work. You know, for my parents' generation, for some of my lucky few in my generation, we were lucky to have a job, and a good job. And life was like entering a tunnel. You join the police force, and you come out of the tunnel 40 years later into a decent retirement. Okay? We won the lottery. But these stable jobs leading to stable careers are an artifact of the last century. They are going to be relevant for a vanishingly few number of people in this century. There's no such thing as a stable job and a stable career. Why do I say this? For a few reasons. One is, you think even about the best managed companies, the kind of companies I was lucky to work with, Microsoft, Infosys, whatever. They're all going through a difficult time. Okay? And so what do? First of all, they keep the permanent employee base quite small. And they use a lot of vendors, suppliers, subcontractors, consultants, gig workers. If you look at Amazon, for instance, there are way more gig workers operating in the warehouses and delivering the parcels than there are permanent employees who are actually running the business. And so you have fewer and fewer jobs. And of course, as we educate more and more people, you have more and more people competing for those jobs. So that's one phenomenon that's going on. Second is, you can be a high-performing employee in the best company, and something happens and your job goes away. So if you read this week, Apple made a quiet decision. They're abandoning the driverless car, the autonomous car project. So you can be a top engineer, okay, working in Apple, $3 trillion company, and like musical chairs, the music stops, sorry, you don't have a chair. And this is happening everywhere, and this is going to happen more and more frequently, musical chairs. The third thing that's happening is we're living longer. All of us in our families have people who are in their 90s now. That's quite routine to have parents, uncles, aunts who are all 90 plus. With any luck, we will be there, okay, the 100-year life. That's good news, but it's also a little difficult because, you know, even if you retire at 60, what am I supposed to do? You don't want to just sit around for the next 30 years. So people want to be engaged, active, productive till you're 75 or 80. But try getting a job if you're older than 50 today. No chance. So these are the challenges. Okay, you need to figure out what to do on your own. And the final thing I would say, particularly in the police force, is we'll all encounter at some point in our professional life a situation which is against our values. Okay, we don't want to do what we are expected to do. And you need to have at that moment the ability to walk away, the freedom to walk away. You shouldn't feel constrained, handicapped, handcuffed, and doing something that is against your own values and ethics. And so, again, I think it is important that we all have that freedom. So my advice very strongly to everybody is stop thinking about jobs and careers. Think in terms of standing on your own feet, self-employment, for a few people starting your own entrepreneurial venture, whatever it is. Because every one of us, including every one of you, is going to have to meet this moment at some point. It may be at 60, it may be sooner. And the point is, actually it's less risky than being in a job where somebody else has the remote control. Okay? And so I talk a lot about how to build a portfolio life where you focus on what you're good at, what you enjoy, and how do you get paid for it. Okay? And so we can do that in the Q&A part to say, how do you actually discover that and get to such a place? So when I look at my life, I've carefully arranged it over 10 years where I do 4 or 5 things. Only one thing actually pays money. The other things I do for joy and satisfaction, or learning or something else. So this is one big shift in the world of work. The second question is, what skills do I need to have in an AI first world? Okay. So you take every profession today, probably not policing, and increasingly machines can do the job better than many human beings. So if you're a chartered accountant, if you're a lawyer, if you're a radiologist looking at X-rays and MRIs, already an AI application can do better than 90% of human beings. Okay? Can't do it better than all, but at 90%. So the question becomes, what skills do I need to have so I stay relevant? And it's a really good question. May not be for you, but certainly for your kids. Okay, what advice do I give them? So I've actually devoted 2 chapters in my book to this because I think it's very important. What skills should you develop that 50 years from now may still be relevant and valuable? And I zoom in on 4 of these super skills, if you will. Very briefly, the first one is called learning agility. Learning agility is not the same thing as learning new things. Okay? So, Dr. Rao, you may say, look, I better learn more about AI, so let me go to Stanford or online and take a course. That's not learning agility. That's good, it's useful. Learning agility is when you're confronted with a situation that you've never experienced. Do you get quickly overwhelmed, or do you have some mental toughness and strength to learn to adapt and eventually thrive in that situation? So if you remember COVID, this is something none of us in the world had ever experienced, that and the lockdown. Some people fell apart. There were a lot of mental health issues, depression, and so forth. Others learned to cope with it, but they said, I hope we go back to the old way. They were just waiting. But some people actually flourished. They said, wow, this is really much better. I want to work remotely. I don't want to ever go back to dealing with Bangalore traffic and going to office. I have work-life balance. I enjoy this way. I'll never go back to the old way. That is learning agility. Okay, this ability to thrive in new situations. Fortunately, cops have learning agility because from day one, I think you're confronted with new situations that you've never dealt with before. The first time you had to deal with a mob or a criminal or whatever. And so by the time you're 10 years into service, this muscle has developed pretty well. But for people in the private sector, they're clueless. You take them out of their narrow comfort zone and they fall apart. So this is much more a private sector type of challenge. The second critical skill is an entrepreneurial mindset. So look, not everybody wants to be an entrepreneur or will be an entrepreneur. But in the 21st century, every single person needs to have an entrepreneur-like mindset. Why? So if you think about any entrepreneur, not necessarily a super successful one, they have a few common qualities. First is, they love problems because they see an opportunity in every problem. The example I give is one of Bhavesh Agarwal of Ola. So all of us were frustrated with taxis and finding an auto rickshaw, unless you were a police officer. But the rest of us citizens, it was always a frustrating experience. But nobody did anything about it. But this young engineer decides to use technology to create a ride-sharing or ride-hailing app and made a lot of money out of it. So the ability to see a problem and convert it into an opportunity is a very entrepreneurial quality. The second one is resourcefulness. Every entrepreneur starts off with no money in the pocket. The most famous example being Narayan Murthy, who borrowed 10,000 from Sudha Murthy, Okay, but all entrepreneurs start with empty pockets and only an idea. And they have to sell that idea to the first employee, to the first customer, to the first investor. This resourcefulness is a very important quality. A third one is problem solving. The only thing you're guaranteed if you start a business or any enterprise is every day there are going to be new problems. And you can't get crushed by it, you have to enjoy solving problems. And the last one is tenacity. No matter how difficult it gets, you keep going and going, and you look at Byju's today. You know, any ordinary person would have given up, but he's still out there batting. Okay, and that's an entrepreneurial quality. And these are going to be required in every one of us because the challenges are going to be that way. And the beautiful thing is, these can be learned by every one of us. These are not, you're not born with them. This is like any muscle you develop. So my organization runs the largest entrepreneurial curriculum in schools in the world. We started out in 1,000 Delhi government schools. And you can imagine, this is the lowest socioeconomic group. And today, 4 million children in 10 states learn our program from 9th to 12th standard with fantastic results, And so, I would say, even in the police, as part of the training, we need to think about how to give this entrepreneurial mindset. It is as relevant here as it is in any other field. The third big super skill is people skills. Google did a fantastic experiment a few years ago. They looked at who are the most successful people in Google, like Sundar Pichai, and what makes them successful. And much to their surprise, they found it's not the techies and coders and software architects. It is people who are good with people. Okay? Even as there's more and more automation and technology, the ability to communicate, the ability to work with others in teams to solve problems and get things done, the ability to problem solve, creativity, these things matter much more than your technical skills. And so even in an AI first world, you're going to succeed two ways. First, by being more human, not by being more machine-like. Okay? So we have to learn to be more human. And number two, AI is not going to replace human beings. A human being using AI is going to replace a human being without AI. So we all need to learn how to use these things. Okay? So these people skills are really important. But the ultimate super skill is the title of the talk, which is leadership. A machine is not going to lead people. People are going to lead people. And if you know how to inspire and lead people, you don't have to worry about anything. You know, that's really the ultimate one. And it turns out leadership is also the biggest challenge of our times. You look at all the problems I talked about, and many, many more, including garbage management in Bangalore. We know the solutions. Okay? We have the resources, but somehow we are not able to come together between government, business, and civil society and citizens to solve these issues, whether it's climate change or something else. And because we're missing leadership. You look in all our organizations and institutions. I bet what you talk about in many of your conversations is either bad leadership or lack of leadership. In the private sector and the companies that I work with, that's the single biggest issue. Okay? So, around the world, the big issue is lack of leadership. Look at the US election. Mr. Reddy and I were talking just before this. A country of 350 million people, the most advanced nation in the world in some ways, and the presidential election is between two 80-year-old angry white men. Okay? Why can't they do better? Look at our choices. Not very exciting. Okay? I don't care which political leaning you are. We are starved of choice. A country of 1.4 billion people ought to throw up more choices. Okay? So this is a global issue. And again, I think the real issue here is how we think about leadership has to change. The problem is most of us, all of us in this room, confuse leadership with hierarchy, title, authority. So if somebody is DGP, IGP, we talk of them as a leader. Whether they act like a leader or not is a different issue. Actually, a constable might be acting like a leader much more, okay? So we have to switch this mindset to understanding that leadership is not title and authority and formal power. It is a behavior. And the world is going to be saved not by great people doing great things, but ordinary people, including all of us, stepping up to the challenge and being, as Gandhiji said, part of the change that we wish to see in the world. So in my talks, in my book, I give lots of examples of really ordinary people doing extraordinary things. So I live in Koramangala first block. One of my neighbors is a lady called Shri Balaram, okay? And she got frustrated with the garbage situation there 7-8 years ago. And she decided, I'm going to do something about it, and started rallying us to segregate wet waste and dry waste and composting. Then she worked with BBMP. And it's one of the best places in the city, okay? Then she starts saying, well, that Koramangala first block is done, check, what do I do next? She leads an effort to clean up Madiwala market. If you go see Madiwala market, it's just unrecognizable. Now she's trying to create a 7-star ward, 7-star under Swachh Bharat in Yelahanka. Who gave her any authority or a mandate? Nothing. Okay? She just decides this is bothering her, she's going to do something about it, and suddenly a lot of us follow. You know, for 5 years I was UNICEF's global head for youth programming, something called Generation Unlimited. And we reached out so far to 200 million young people all over the world and taught them how to be leaders. And these are again people from the lowest socio-economic backgrounds. Some, Dalit person in northern India, it doesn't get much tougher. And we get them to think about leadership. And you don't go talking about leadership. How do we do it? Some youth volunteer will go to a school and start talking to the kids. He'll say, what bothers you? He'll say, what bothers me is the school toilet hasn't worked for 2 years and I'm tired of complaining, nobody does anything. So, okay, why did you fix it? Like shocked, how can I fix it? Go get real. Then next day you say, look, come back with 3 more friends who are also frustrated. And then you help them fix the toilet. Suddenly, things change. They realize, I'm not a victim. I don't have to wait for somebody to go fix problems. I'm also capable of fixing small problems. And oh, by the way, when I decided to do something, 4 other people joined hands. They were waiting for leadership. And now you give them a bigger challenge. That's how we have trained 200 million young people all over the world, including many, many, many in India, but I think about 30, 40 million are in India, to recognize that they are also capable of leadership. And this, I think, is a huge part of what we need to do in your service. This is what I do in the companies that I'm involved in. There's a whole technique to doing this. So I know I'm running out of time, how many minutes. The last thing I want to tell you is this. The most central question in life is just this: why am I here? Okay? Why do I exist? What is my life to be all about? Now, some people are lucky quite early in life, they know what it is. Some great musician, writer, artist, they know quite early that this is their life. Bill Gates said that, I worked closely with him for 2-3 years. He said at age 11 he knew this is it. Coding and software is what his life was about, and he's still doing quite a bit of that when he's not at the Ambani wedding. Now, most of us are not so lucky, and we don't, only rarely do we think about it. And then, the other day I was visiting my uncle, he's 93, okay? And he has some regrets, even though he's had a good life, he has some regrets. He felt he could have done more with his life. I don't think it's fun to reach the end of life and have regrets about how you lived it. Mark Twain, the American writer, he says there are only 2 days that matter in your life. First is the day you were born, and the second is the day when you figured out why you were born. And so I think it is important for us to try and be intentional about that. But you'll never get the answer to that if you care a lot about what other people think. The central conditioning that you have to shed is stop caring so much about what other people think and trying to please them. 2000 years ago, there was a Roman emperor called Marcus Aurelius. And one of the things he wrote is, the most puzzling thing to me, he says, is why every person, every human being, loves himself more than anybody else, including your own child. But you place more emphasis on the opinion of a random stranger than your own opinion. And the answer is very simple. We've been conditioned since birth to please. Our parents rewarded us for doing good behaviors and punished us for other things. You went to school, you had to keep the teacher happy. You join an organization, you have to keep the boss happy. And so pretty soon, you've lost yourself. And so one day you wake up, usually it's the midlife crisis, and you realize this is not the life you wanted to lead, but now you feel trapped. So one of the important things is to stop this conditioned behavior and start asking yourself, why am I here? And reclaim your life and redefine success on your own terms. I think this is going to be even more critical in this century than in history. So let me pause here. I hope I've got you at least thinking about a few things. Not that you have to agree with much of what I said, but I think my main aim was to get you at least in the mode of questioning some of these issues for yourself. So let me stop and see if there is any reaction.
Thank you, sir, for the extremely igniting talk, to say the least. I'm sure our officers have questions to ask. Connects to the middle part of your talk. Over the years, we see that a lot of leaders are getting away with ends justifying the means. Do you think it's going to be the norm? Or is it some new norm that it's going to be? Or has it always been that way? Or how do we deal with the situation?
As I said, we are living in an extraordinary time which is called a post-truth world, where the facts and truths matter less and less, and there is a greater disconnect between actions and consequences. So it's nice to live in a fairy tale world where karma works in a short cycle and there are real consequences for your actions. I don't think we live in such a time. And so I think if you see globally, we are seeing behaviors becoming worse and worse. Every day new boundaries are being breached of bad behavior. And people are getting away with it or even getting rewarded for it. So, so I think we're in a pretty bad place in the world right now. And this is why I think it is more important for us to think individually about the kind of person you want to be, because we have to live with the consequences of our own actions. Okay? So I am not personally very optimistic about a society which is just, or a world which is just. I don't think that's going to be there anytime soon. However, I say, look, each of us has to live with our own conscience, and we have to live with our own consequences and choices. And so let's be intentional about it. That's all I can say. Yeah.
Thank you. If you
I'm BK Singh, presently at CBG, CID. Two things we have discussed about more about the AI, but the second part which we initially started about the technology, this genome and that thing. What normally at present level of biology, what we had learned and we know is that your human life, any life expectancy of any animal on earth is directly related to his speed of breathing. An animal who breathes very slow lives more longer.
Yeah.
And the animal who breathes faster, it dies faster. And the dichotomy, the moment the state stops breathing, he dies. So, are we going to a stage where we are going to be immortal by reducing the breathing speed? Or we can think we don't require breathing at all. That is one. And second is again the post-truth world. Our the present state of democracy all around the world is that we are somewhat every nation which are so democratic are leading towards a democratic autocracy. If you use the
Yes.
correct word, if we are leading towards a democratic autocracy where the democracy is limited to the extent of an election. That also maybe we cannot say it is going to be fair, free and fair, but yes, a government comes in a elected way and then starts behaving in autocratic way, and almost all the democracies are leading towards that way. Do we think that it is going to be the future of the democracy all around the world, or something is going to change?
Wow, both are googlies. The first one is very interesting because I also was under the impression, exactly like you, that it's almost like God is, the Creator has given us so many breaths, and if you breathe fast, you're going to live. So a dog, for instance, has very rapid breathing and lives about 14, 15 years, and a whale or a tortoise or these kind of very. But I think it's becoming much more complicated than that. I don't know much, but I've just been gifted a book on, living to be almost immortal. I think there is very clear evidence that the single biggest cause of our death is accumulation of waste at a cellular level. And if you can in some way sort of reduce that, you're a doctor. You will extend your life. A very easy way to do that is eat less. So extreme calorific restriction or intermittent fasting, all these things are showing signs of extending life. You can also now, increasingly the billionaires in the world, in America in particular, don't want to die. And so they're investing heavily in research to be immortal. I think there is high confidence that we will, with the right supplements and treatments, you can live up to 150 now. But this is completely out of my expertise range. But my sense is, with not immortality, but we can certainly hope to extend life with a little bit of discipline and external medical assistance for a fairly considerable period. So already without much effort, 100-year life is within reach. And it is, I think, very, very conceivable soon that those who can afford these supplements and treatments could double that. Okay? But again, it's going to create another form of inequality. Those who can afford it, those who can't. Okay? The genomics can also say you can engineer your child to have certain qualities, greater strength, greater intelligence. Okay, again, it'll increase the divide between those who can afford to have their children engineered for certain characteristics. It's a terrifying world if you think about it, okay? But anyway, out of my expertise zone. The second one is absolutely true. that around the world there is a tendency towards elected autocracies. I was telling again Mr. Reddy about yesterday I read a new Pew Research, which is an independent research agency that conducts these polls, large sample size polls across countries. They surveyed citizens in 8 countries, including India, Mexico, Brazil, United States, all the countries which are going to go into elections, big elections this year. And people there really don't care about democracy. They want strong governments, strong leaders. They want governments that will deliver some economic progress for them. And that's all that matters, okay? So we are seeing a very large secular tendency, secular not in the religious sense, but a uniform tendency globally towards elected autocracies. And I don't know whether that's a short-term trend or a long-term trend, but certainly it's a trend that will be there for the next decade or longer. And you're seeing therefore also a move towards majoritarianism, where might is right. Again, no reflection on our country alone. You see this in every part of the world. It's troubling. It's troubling actually. I'd see an even worse trend towards tribalism, as we lose faith in institutions, as we lose faith in government, etc. We could easily start becoming more tribal. Who do you identify with? You'll identify either with people around you or people like you in some way. What is like? In my case, it might be highly educated, English-speaking people everywhere in the world. For somebody else, it's defined around caste or community or religion, whatever. You'll find some affinity group, and so you could break down into a much more tribal situation. We don't know. I'm not competent enough to answer it, but these are all very troubling trends. Generally speaking, it is the conclusion of people I respect, that the world could be slowly entering a new dark age. If you remember, Europe entered a dark ages after the fall of Rome around 475 AD, and it did not emerge for 1,000 years when the Renaissance brought them out of that dark age. So for 1,000 years, the rest of the world was fine. China was fine, India was doing fine. The Middle East saw the Arab Empire was very successful. But Europe was in a 1,000-year dark age. There's a high risk that globally we could be slipping into a new dark age. For how long that lasts, we don't know. But interesting times, very interesting times. Thank you for asking.
Ravi, from this intervention, whatever you said, the tribalism and the issues which concern us, I think the challenge for all these youngsters, in 2 months I'm out of it, I don't have to manage that, but the leadership of the police is to navigate these challenging times. These are the kinds of things that they have to ensure that some of these youngsters who are here would be there for the next 25-30 years, leading the police and trying to do that. What are those skill sets, particularly when you are the custodian where the competing interests keep working in the society, and you are the common thread that is supposed to uphold and showcase it and ensure that there is a sense of balance. And I think that is one big challenge which, as police leaders and leadership here, has to cope with. And how do they build trust in these circumstances?
That's a brilliant question, and I wish I were competent to answer it. But I do try and answer it for all individuals. But I think it's when you have as important a responsibility as you all have as police officers, it becomes even more. As the world around us is becoming more turbulent and crazy, you have to have a strong inner compass to navigate. Okay, So this is really, really important. So you have to be, each of us has to be grounded in our own values, strongly held values and beliefs about what is right and what is wrong. Because if you don't have that, you could end up anywhere. Because all around you, you're not necessarily getting good leadership. Okay? So you have to actually look for that, have that inner compass or GPS, if you will. That is central. You have to develop. So I've written a lot about the inner game of leadership versus the outer game of leadership. What you all play is the outer game, okay, where you look for results, you try and get people to follow you, follow your instructions, achieve things. That's the outer game. But the inner game of leadership is about self-awareness, self-belief, your moral values, your ability to regulate your own behavior, etc. I think that inner character building becomes way more important now because the scaffolding of the institution is falling apart. Okay. So let's talk about a difficult subject, corruption. We live in an extremely corrupt society. It's not, and you can't just say, oh well, politics is corrupt. No, we're societally corrupt. Our religion is corrupt. You look at all the so-called religious leaders. It's there. It's like a cancer that's there everywhere. But there are two places where I think the challenges of corruption are particularly high. I served in banking, and corruption in banking is legendary. Okay, because you're dealing with money, and a lot of it is cash. I think the policing is another area where temptation is very, very close to the surface. And to your question, there are no consequences. Okay? So you have to develop that inner compass and decide what sort of a person you want to be. And if you don't do it, so be it. So the most important thing I would say to the younger officers who are coming up is to pay attention to that inner game. Because otherwise you're going to be like a piece of driftwood. You don't know, you're just being carried along by the river and you don't know where you'll end up. Usually it's in a dark place, okay? Usually you're in a dark place. I'm giving useless answers because these questions are so good, they're very deep, okay? And they defy glib, easy answers. We have to figure it out for ourselves. You know, one of the interesting things, I'm very fascinated by Nazi Germany. Not recently, long time, and just for whatever reason, had a great fascination. So one of my favorite books, by the way, I hope all of you are in the reading habit. If not, particularly the younger officers, find the time to read. It's going to serve you well. So this book is called Hitler's Willing Executioners, and it was written by somebody I got to know in the 90s. And he looks at a very interesting question. Why did so many ordinary, decent Germans follow Hitler and do the unbelievably bad things they did? So he goes and looks at them. They're perfectly fine human beings. They're a devoted father, devoted husband. Then they go to work in the morning, kill 10,000 Jews, come home, have a shower, and then say their prayers, go to church. How do they manage this extreme contradiction? Then he says, also, by the way, he found most of them were willing. They were not unwilling. Okay, fascinating. So, by the way, those few, very small, 1% who refused to do these things, there were no consequences. It's not like they were shot, executed, punished. If you said, I didn't want to do it, strangely, there were no great consequences. So they were willing, okay? And that's the puzzling moral dilemma that he examines. And I think there's some beautiful lessons for all of us. When you're put in circumstances the importance of making your own choice is very, very, very fascinating. And why don't more people choose? And the answer is they're either lazy or they're opportunists, and more are opportunists. But human behavior is actually, human nature, not behavior, is profoundly disturbing if you read about it. And there's nothing new. Everything that we are going through has happened before. So history is a beautiful teacher. You should spend more time learning. Only the senior officers are asking. Ah, good, thank heavens.
So my name is Venkatesan. I'm right now the commandant plus battalion KSW. So the thing is, my question is, where do you see the bureaucracy headed? Because now you see there's so much change which is happening. Because in recent times, the public as well as many of the institutions are not just influenced by the surrounding, but they are trying to compete in the global level. Today, even if you see on the road today, the expectation of the citizen is not just limited to Bangalore city. He expects, because he's traveled outside, he sees, he's exposed to outside news. He expects a similar kind of policing or be it any kind of services the government is providing. So where do you think the bureaucracy would be in the next 10 years? Would it remain the same, or would there be a change, or the resistance which will be within the system and outside also?
The answer is very simple. It depends on you. Okay? The bureaucracy is not something which has a life or a mind of its own. It is the sigma of a lot of individuals and individual leaders. So if there are more competent officers who show good leadership, it's going to head in a good direction. And the opposite is equally possible. That's why I say, look, none of us has that much influence over where is India headed, where is the institution headed. What we have a lot of influence is your choices. Okay? You can be the change in your battalion and make sure that is a high-performing unit. Okay? That's all you can do. And if enough of other people operate similarly, and somehow magically you all connect into a network, the entire institution will get transformed. Okay, that's all you can do. I don't know if the more senior leaders over here would agree or not, but I don't know of any other thing. I worked in large companies, big global companies, Microsoft, Cummins, whatnot. And I started out like you from the front ranks. And many of them were not always well-run places. All I did was put my head down and created excellence in my unit. Gradually I got promoted. Gradually I formed networks with other similar-minded leaders. We came up as a cohort. Things did well. So I think where the world ends up, where your Karnataka police ends up, is very much dependent on a lot of you. And you can only control how you lead. As I said in the beginning, leadership is not about big people doing great things. Change rarely comes from the top. Okay? Change is going to come from ordinary people doing extraordinary things.
Thank you.
I just have a question on that. It's about I heard that you have some work on the gender and leadership. So I would like to ask about the glass ceiling effect. So why still America is not having a woman president, or if you look at our country, be it a political sphere, be it bureaucracy or in the corporate, you can see that glass ceiling is very predominant. So do you think, how to shatter the glass ceiling?
Excellent question. it gets shattered by a few pioneering individuals who refuse to accept the glass ceiling and find a way to shatter it. And once one person shatters it, then everybody is able, other people are able to emulate it. It always takes one, the first person, to do it, right? So very, very interesting. My wife worked for 23 years in a Japanese company. Japanese companies, even today, are the most misogynistic, okay? And she grew to be, for 17 years, she was the CEO of Fanuc India here in Electronic City. And she was the most senior woman in the whole Japanese company, reporting to the founder. And I watched her over this period of time. And I think a great part of her success came from not having her primary identity around being a woman. If she had bought into that, she would have only served tea, okay? Because that's how that culture is. Her identity was around excellence, okay? And she just refused to accept in a male-dominated industry and a male-dominated company that a woman can't go all the way. And I think there are many, many, many role models in India of women leaders in business and in the civil services and everywhere. So my advice is that the glass ceiling should be in other people's eyes, not in yours. Okay? And it is a question of intensity. One of the things I've learned, I've worked for two extraordinary individuals. One was Bill Gates, one was Narayan Murthy. And what I saw in both of them was something sort of very special. Intensity. Okay? They're like the sun. They're so focused, so intense, that the rest of us pale in terms of that intensity. And their ability to therefore achieve extraordinary things was directly proportional to this. So if you're going to shatter glass ceilings, you also have to be laser focused. Okay? That's how I'd see it. I think we're running out of.
Any more questions? I just will have one more. Speaking of leadership in the traditional sense, be it bureaucrats or political executive, we see that social media has played a very, very big role in creating leaders. So these traditional leaders are able to rig the system using social media or mainstream media or PR agencies. How do we see this going? So is this going to be the norm again? And are we going to get really bad leaders if this is going to be the norm? And how do we deal with this situation in the future?
Technology, whether it's social media or AI, anything else, is completely amoral. It has no sort of morality or thought of its own. It's only a tool, an enabler. In the hands of a good person, or what you consider a good person, it's an enabler. In the hands of somebody we consider a bad person, it's also an amplifier. Unfortunately, bad actors have always been at the forefront of exploiting technology. So if you see digital technologies, the first adopters were who? Pornography industry. Okay, it was at the, and this is not a joke, it literally was the earliest adopter of digital technologies. Then comes cybercrime, etc. Okay, so always the bad guys seem to be very much at the pioneers of using this stuff. I think the answer to your question is so-called good leaders, because good and bad is also subjective. It's in my opinion and your. I think good leaders need to also start using exactly the same tools to amplify their work and ideas and so forth. I think that's what's required.
If there are no more questions, I think we'll very igniting first half where you sparked all their questions. And I think most of the questions were very deep and, as you said, didn't have a clear-cut answer. So we just have to make our own personal choices and hope for a better future. And as police officers, we are in various stages of our careers. And we keep passing through these stages as in technology, along with technology is exploding, along with exploding technology, we have to somehow cope with these situations. It was very an igniting session. It's very inspiring. Thank you so much. And you're taking your time to be here.
Thank you for
Despite
extending the invitation.
the schedules, you've been traveling in and out of the country. And some of you, we were able to get you today here.
Thank you.
So on behalf of the President of the IPS Association in absentia, and on behalf of the entire association members here and family members of the IPS family, I would like to extend my heartful gratitude for having been here and shared your insights on subject. So thank you so much. And thank you all for sparing your time, despite whatever is happening in the city. Some officers couldn't be here, and I'm really thankful that all the senior officers were able to make it here, and especially the junior officers. Took your time on a Saturday evening, and the family members. I wholeheartedly thank the family members and all of you gathered here on behalf of the President and the association. So we can all gather for dinner. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you.